Hey everyone, welcome to Mr. H on YouTube. Today we are going to be talking about the second half of World War II, mostly beginning around 1943 and talking about war's end. This video will cover the major turning points of World War II in the European theater. If you were hoping to learn a little bit more about the end of the war in Asia, tune in tomorrow for a brief video about that. If you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe to Mr. H on YouTube. Summer is quickly coming. But we will continue to be pumping out these history and fun videos throughout the summer for all of us who might be stuck inside during this quarantine. But with that being said, let's get right into it. World War II at this point was an Axis domination. 1943 saw the height of Germany's extent as its empire. However, there were cracks starting to develop. Uh, Mostly beginning in North Africa was where the first major non-Soviet victories for the Allies. Operation Torch was the Allied attack of North Africa. By 1942, 1943, the British, Canadians, Americans had really pushed the Germans and Italians out of North Africa. This really showcased to the Western Allies just how weak Italy was as a military power. And that Germany, just like it did in World War I, would have to really share the load and do the heavy lifting when it came to fighting in World War II. This would set up the eventual Allied invasion of Italy. But before we talk a little bit about that, let's go to really what I consider, what many historians consider, the major turning point of World War II in Europe, which was the Battle of Stalingrad. The Soviet army had been pushed all the way to the Volga River. However, the German army broke its strength trying to take Stalingrad. This was part of Hitler's new strategy after the failure to take Moscow to go in and capture the oil fields of the Caucasus region. The Soviets were able to push back and began a massive offensive that would push the Germans throughout the east. We won't really cover too much of the major battles of the Eastern Front of Europe during this video. However, if you would like a separate video when it comes to the times and battles of between 1943 and 1945, feel free to comment down below. Let's turn back then to Southern Europe. The Allies used North Africa as a springboard to first launch into Sicily, which would then become a springboard into Italy. Italy was seen as the soft underbelly of the Axis, that they could not adequately defend the coastline from the Allied attack. The Italian Navy was pretty much non-existent. The German Navy was ineffective against the British patrols. And also the British and American Air Force had gained dominance in the air over Italy. By the end of 1943, the Allies had moved up through Italy and had captured Rome. This was seen as a major turning point. And the Americans and British had thought that this could be seen as a way to go up through northern Italy and attack Germany around the mountains. However, Mussolini was able to escape, and thanks to German paratroopers, was escorted up to northern Italy, where he formed a new Italian defense against the Allied invasion. This is where we see two different Italys. You have the legitimate democratic government of Italy that's formed after the fall of Rome and surrenders to the Allies. And then you have the fascist state in northern Italy that was nominally controlled by Mussolini, but was actually a German puppet state, very similar to the other fascist states in Eastern Europe. Italy would then become a stalemate for the Allies. This was due in no small part to the geography and terrain of Italy. The mountains of northern Italy made it almost near impossible to break through. This led more and more to Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, seeing the Allies as ineffective, as well as unable to really turn the tide of the war. His constant reiteration of the need for a second front to fight Germany. And of course, by 1944, this leads to Operation Overlord, more famously known as D-Day. The Allies would use an amphibious assault upon the beaches of Normandy, France, opening up a second front and forcing the German army to fight in a two-front war. Operation Overlord goes down in history not only as the largest naval and amphibious assault in history, but it also goes down as one of the greatest spy master plans in military history. The Allied invasion led by General Dwight D. Eisenhower was years and years in the making, to the point where, for instance, so much false communication was given to the German army that they were completely convinced that the attack was not going to be at Normandy but at Calais. On the night of December 5th, U.S. paratroopers and Canadian and British paratroopers were dropped behind the enemy lines on the beaches of Normandy to wreak havoc. One of the great ironies of history, or maybe the great what-ifs of history, the paratroopers were supposed to be dropped on a specific spots in specific landing points, but due to the weather, due to German anti-aircraft fire, the paratroopers were dropped all over in scattered clumps, and so groups of 5, 10, 15 paratroopers would go and basically carry out their missions in small squadrons or bands of people together. And this is, many historians see this as a great advantage of the attack, because the Germans had no idea where they were. They were so small and undetectable that it was near impossible for the Germans to mount adequate defense. The main thrust of the Allied attack came on the amphibious beaches of Normandy. The British and their their colonial possessions would attack the three of the beaches, whereas the United States would take the brunt of Utah and Omaha. Bloody Omaha would become synonymous with the sacrifice of American soldiers that day, as many fell due to the amphibious defenses the Germans had. However, by December 6th, the end of December 6th, the beaches had been taken, and within the next couple of weeks, the surrounding towns were taken as well, including, if you are a fan of Band of Brothers, the village of Carentan, which united the different roads to the beaches. And so a new front was established for the Allies. This would culminate in the liberation of Paris later that summer. In August, the Allied forces were able to drive out Germany back towards the German frontier. Now, as the Soviets and the Allies were moving closer and closer on Germany, the ideal became not so much if the Allies would win, but when and how. By the end of 1943, it becomes apparent that Germany has been defeated, and now it's a matter of who can win first. Will the Soviets defeat the Germans, or will the Allies, the Western Allies, defeat the Germans? And so the Allies devise a strategy to go basically reverse what the Germans had did against France when they went around the Maginot Line. The Allies developed Operation Market Garden, which was an aerial attack and paratroop attack in the Netherlands and southern Belgium. They would take the bridges that would connect them into Germany and would be able to bypass the main defenses of Germany. And many projected that this would be a a knockout blow to the Germans and would end the war by Christmas of 1944. Operation Market Garden goes down as one of the greatest military disasters in World War II for the Allies. The bridges were unable to be taken. Countless lives were lost. Confusion and poor leadership, most notably from British General Montgomery, leads to the operation being an abject failure. A quick end to the war on the Western Front is untenable. And so the Allies settle in and they begin pushing slowly towards the German frontier, eventually reaching it by the Christmas of 1944. This is when Hitler launches his final gambit, known as the Battle of the Bulge. His panzer divisions and German army push through a line in the Ardennes forest and basically creates a bulge in the line which surrounds several people who are, not people, but paratroopers from the 101st Airborne. This was threatening to cut off the northern half of the Allied army. Eventually, General Patton, a U.S. tank general, would break through the German lines with his 3rd Armored Division and would save the paratroopers. And this would lead to the end of the Battle of the Bulge and a defeat for Germany. However, it did demonstrate Germany's willingness to continue to fight to the bitter end. By 1945, you have the Soviets who are within striking distance of Germany, and you have the Allies who are battling, trying to cross the waters of the Rhine River into Germany itself. The Soviets begin a race towards Berlin, the capital of Germany. Stalin was not going to allow the Western Allies to capture Berlin, and so a race goes on between his 2 generals, and the Soviet Red Army eventually makes its way to Berlin by spring of 1945, and the Battle of Berlin begins. Over the next month, in April, the beleaguered German army tries to stop and halt the attacks by the Red Army, but to no avail. Eventually, the Soviets have entered Berlin and captured such famous landmarks as the Reichstag, the German parliament. During this time, Adolf Hitler, along with many of his senior officials, had secured themselves in what was known as the Führer bunker. There, Hitler celebrated his birthday and married his longtime mistress Eva Braun, and then subsequently killed himself, ending really the German Reich at that point. The fighting would continue for the next couple of days, but by early May, the war in Europe had ended. By this point, the animosity between the Soviets and the Western Allies was becoming more and more apparent as the Soviets looked to create a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, and the Western Allies looked to create pro-Western governments in their occupied territories. This would lay the foundation for the Cold War in the subsequent decades. But this is where we'll probably stop here, and you might say to yourself, well, what happened to President Roosevelt? What happens? What about the Holocaust and all those things that occurred during the end period of World War II? Those will all be covered in a video that will be coming out later this week as sort of a wrap up to World War II. But until then, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Mr. H on YouTube, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.